Nvidia's share price falls even amid revenue doubling, and gold finishes the day down 1%. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ainslie Insights, brought to you by Ainslie Bullion, Ainslie Crypto, and the Gold and Silver Standard as the Ainslie Group celebrates 50 years. Today, welcome back Branko, who's been looking into Nvidia's recent performance and what insights it might provide into where the markets are heading next. How are you going today, Branko?
Yeah, good today, Chris. Keen to talk about just a bit of a market wrap up. Nvidia kind of dominated the headlines. I thought we'd touch on that mainly. Yeah.
Well, and it was interesting because the earnings were very good. So, they really, it's been one that everyone's been focused on for a long time in the market, that AI play, all of that tied in together. What do you think sort of drove this disconnect that we saw between the strong financial performance and then the market behavior? Does it mean that something's changing in investor sentiment? What's going on there?
Yeah, so I think that the first point to make is during after hours before the earnings came out, we saw Nvidia go down about 7% from their share price. And then once the reports got released, which were very positive and exceeded expectations, it clawed most of that back up, most of that loss back. So just some brief numbers on that. 122% year over year and better than analysts anticipated. So the forecasted revenue was about 28.7 billion and they got to 30 billion. So beat expectations, that's great. And I think that a key point to take away is this idea that people had already thought that the AI narrative was kind of priced in about how well it's doing. And that's why people were kind of shorting it pre-release, expecting things to go down because there's a general belief amongst those traders that, AI it's the narrative is too strong, it's a bit overblown. But in reality, now that it's actually beaten the projections, it's obviously changed a lot. So the disconnect would be the belief of a lot of people and traders that this narrative was overblown. And then when it actually came out, it was really positive. And what I found interesting was that the media headlines were so all over the place, because at the end of the day, it was a flat zero. It was like, oh, it didn't do that well. But if you actually look at it in more detail, it's pretty evident that it's a positive for Nvidia and a positive for tech in general.
And it's such an interesting company because obviously AI's, taken over our thoughts for the last couple of years. It's been something that's impacting everyone. But when you look at that market in the S&P 500, in the Nasdaq, Nvidia plays a very significant role. Like, it's become, because it's so large, it's become a major part of those indexes. So do you think that really it's going to continue sort of, for lack of a better word, pushing the market around in the context of what's going on? And do you think that AI is becoming sort of a theme that has to be paid attention to, I suppose, in all of those markets, because you've got those big players like Nvidia that are really such a big component of the index?
Yeah, so I do think that in general, like for any asset classes, like even gold, for example, which we can discuss later, people have to pay attention to AI because it's such a big part of the global market share. Um, Nvidia itself represents about 6% of the S&P 500, which is obviously crazy, and it's the third largest company in the world right now, with a market cap of about 3.1 trillion. So, given its size, it kind of controls a lot of like the share market right now in the US. I mean, it's especially, you look at all the attention that this earnings call was given, all the headlines were just Nvidia this, Nvidia that, blah, blah, blah. And, I do think in a way it does kind of lead things. However, it generally overperforms the tech sector. So, for example, the index has gone up about 27% the past 12 months, but Nvidia has gone up about 167. So, I wouldn't say it's perfectly correlated. Like, I think that generally it's very bullish and tech can kind of fluctuate, but in general, there's probably a general trend that Nvidia will lead it, and if it's up, generally tech will go up as well.
Which it makes sense because it's obviously a significant player in that space. But turning the focus a little bit, you also talked about the Fed, and that has been something we've been focusing on this week after we sort of heard from Jerome Powell that he was taking a much more dovish stance on things. Do you think that? Well, first of all, I'm interested in your interpretation of what the Fed's doing here, because that stance on interest rates seems to be changing. It's probably getting priced in. Do you think there's implications there when you're thinking about the stock market generally, Nvidia, safe haven assets like gold? What's your view on your take on the Fed currently?
Yeah, I think it's really hard. I mean, I wouldn't say I have a strong take. I think it's funny that the uncertainty that traders had trading with Nvidia is kind of like a symbol of the global economy right now. I think there's just so much uncertainty. No one knows. 2 weeks ago, it was like, oh, Fed's gonna like interest rates are gonna start going down, and now it's kind of changing, and no one really knows. So I think it's hard to have a true read on what's going on. I think the only thing is that there is a lot of uncertainty and a lot of variables at play, and then obviously that benefits precious metals just from that pure fact. But yeah, I think it's hard to have a strong stance. What are your thoughts on that at the moment?
Well, probably similar. It is a bit confusing in the market, but I mean, when you talk about gold as the example, I mean, you mentioned there, 1% drop despite a positive year overall, but really gold's been doing exceptionally well. And to the point that you just made, I think that probably is a reflection of the uncertainty that exists around the world because it isn't just in the markets. I'd actually think the markets have probably pretty clearly heading up because we've got,
Yeah.
the things we talk about, the global liquidity, all of that's looking quite positive and heading in the right direction. But you can never be too sure because you've also got massive turmoil going on around the world, particularly when you think about the geopolitical stuff. So yeah, that my take on it is pretty much what you said. And I think the best way to reflect that is the price of gold staying strong because even a 1% dip, I mean, I'm
Yeah,
sure you would agree, relatively speaking, that's quite small.
I mean, we did have like a lot of money back into gold ETFs as well now, which is interesting for the fourth month in a row. So yeah, gold's strong. But yeah, I think that's a good point about. I agree the general trend is up, but the introduction of all these different variables at play, like for example, it was only a few weeks ago we had the jobs report uh, come out down
That
180,000.
massive revision, yeah.
And it's like the whole market's exploding recession. Like, and that was only a few weeks ago. And, who knows? And plus we have an election in November and whatever's going to happen there. So there's just so many variables right now. And I think people are just very uncertain. And again, that's, yeah, I think clearly displayed in so many things, including our own RBA's decision-making process. They're also seem very uncertain. So yeah, it's a very turbulent time.
So, given that, where you've got these mixed signals, you've got the economic indicators all over the place, you've got uncertainty in tech stocks, although they're looking pretty good. Gold's been looking great. But what do you think is the strategy? What's the advice you give here to people who are thinking, who are going, well, it's a bit confusing. I'm not quite sure how to approach this. Is it, should they really be looking at their asset allocation and making sure they're diversified? Is that the answer? Is it that you probably need to have a little bit of extra insurance during turbulent times? Is it things are looking great, so all in on Bitcoin? Like, what's your view?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm pro Bitcoin as well, but I think gold gives you the advantage of gold is just it takes advantage of all these variables coming into play, so you can probably get um, in general the stability of it as it, in the event that things trend up, which a lot of factors do seem that way, but it also gives you significant insurance in the event we have something coming that can crash the market. I mean, there's just yeah, it's so difficult to amplify because I agree that you look at the way everything's going with tech, possible rate cuts, Nvidia earnings obviously being higher than normal, et cetera, et cetera. And you would think it's going to go up, but there's still you can have these crazy catalysts that could appear out of nowhere, and precious metals obviously take advantage of that really well while also maintaining a high floor. It's just a very unique time right now. Um, and
Well,
who
and
knows
gold,
what the next catalyst is gonna be? It could,
I completely agree. And gold has been one of those, particularly through this period of time, has been one of those assets that really hasn't had the downside because you've got the protection for the unexpected should it come, but it's also been performing. I mean, it's at all time highs. It's sitting right there right
yeah,
now. So yeah, you've had the benefit of both.
yeah. And if you want tech stock exposure, I guess I think Nvidia is a good option just because it seems as though it's you know, in a bull market, it's going to overperform the rest of the stocks, as
Mm.
I discussed earlier. 27% for the index and 167 for Nvidia. So it's got like a higher beta there. So it's going to overperform. We haven't really seen Nvidia perform, I don't think, in like a bit how a bear market would look. So that could be interesting. Are we going to see, more of a pullback, or are we going to see it become kind of like a tech safe haven because of all the growth opportunities there? So clearly in like a kind of a bull market, Nvidia is a good investment in the tech sector. But yeah, overall, it's just a very difficult. And then plus, obviously, you have Bitcoin as well, which I think is holding steady at the moment. So yeah, it's a very difficult situation.
Well, it's always interesting to look into these things, and I appreciate your work on that. Particularly, I haven't been paying close enough attention to what's been going on with Nvidia. I've been too focused on sort of what's happened in the markets generally. But when you see that, it really did blow me away reading that article that you've got massive outperformance, and then the stock sort of went down. It was quite interesting, but that's how these markets go. So
Yeah,
yeah, interesting, and thank you for your work on keeping on top of that for us.
no worries. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks everyone for watching. We'll chat again soon.